Kia ora koutou katoa. Ko Edward Elson taku ingoa no Te Poti o te iwi o Kaitahu me Te Atiawa a tēnā rā koutou a tuatahi ka puta mai he karakia, whai mai te rā he mihi kia koutou katoa. Tuatahi. Mai e te tipua, mai e te tāwhito, mai e te kāhui o ngā riki, mai e tāwhiwhi ki ngā atua ui takina te Māori, ko te Māori i ahua nō ki runga ki nei tau rā, ki nei tau i rā, ki tau te Māori ki runga, ki nei tama ka puta mai ki te whaiao, ki te ao marama, uhi, wero, hara mai te toki, haumi e hui e, ātai ki e. Tēnei te ruru te kaukau mai nei ki hae mahiti hiti, ki hae maraka raka tūpoko nui te ruru. Te re kau, he pō, he ao kāua te. Nō reira, nei rā te mihi kia koutou, koutou mā ngā kaititiro, e whaia wāhi tēnei wāhanga o te rā nei, tēnā rā koutou katoa. Koutou mā, hākui, hākoro tai atu ki ngā tamariki mokopuna, o ngā karangatanga maha katoa, tēnā rā koutou, ngā e rere ana ngā mihi mai, o ngā maunga aoraki ki o koutou nei maunga awa, me ngā wahi pito, nō reira tēnei te mihi o te rā nei ki koutou katoa. O koutou o te rahi me te iti, koutou kai titiro, tēnā mihi. Nau mai, haere mai ki tēnei wāhanga o te rā nei. Ka tika ka huri ki o rātou ngā mate huhu o te motu koutou mā, e o rātou mā, kua hinga atu, kua hinga mai, i te rā, te wiki, te marama me te tau nei, o rātou, o Joe Hawke, o Takaparawhau, Takoto mai rā, haere moi mai, o Dame Aroha Rarity Croft, kua hinga atu ki o tautahi, o rātou, ngā mate katoa, o te June Jackson, Moana Jackson, ngā takata roko nui o tau Māori, haere moi mai, oki mai. Ka huri anō ki te kaupapa tā rā nei, o tēnei wāhanga e pāna ko tēnei kaupapa Crazy Ambitious, tēnā mihi kia koutou katoa, ngā kai whakaari, te kaupapa mō Putanoa, ki au tātou nei whānui, ti toro mai, tēnā rā koutou, he kaupapa nunui, e te aki manaki o tātou nei tāoke tuku ihua mai o tātou nei mātua tūpuna, he kaupapa nunui mō tātou katoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora koutou katoa. Just briefly welcome everyone, ngā mihi to you all watching and also our presenters for the program this morning. Looking forward to being a part of this. Kia ora koutou katoa. Kia ora, Taylor.
Come here, Edward. Thank you very much. Thank you to Edward. It's great to have him open the conference this morning. He's a real... he seems to be everywhere you look in conservation in Aotearoa, so it's an honour to have him to open this morning's proceedings. So Atamaria kia koutou, ngami nui kia koutou, no mai, haere mai, welcome everyone. Ko Taylor tōku ingoa. My name is Taylor and I am going to be today's MC, so it's a real honour to be here on this last day of what has been an amazing conference so far. Before we get started into a really awesome schedule of talks, there's a few little bits of housekeeping that I just have to go through. A reminder that there's a lot of help on this really cool techie platform. If you do meet any technical difficulties today, there's a live support function and you can access that in this view or out in the foyer section as well and get some help if you are facing any issues. If your internet is struggling a little bit with the awesome content that's coming through today, there is options for lower latency streams, which will be a bit kinder and might work a bit better for you. So those options will come up if you meet into those troubles. Closed captions are available for all of our talks. So there's an option, should be an option on your screen for closed captions if you'd like them, if those would be helpful for you today. And this platform, I'm really enjoying just seeing how like technical it is in terms of not only its ability for us to engage in these awesome kōrero, but also in terms of its functions around meeting others. So there's that meeting room. There's also those networking sessions for everyone to engage with today. And also during our talks especially, there's our live Q&A function where you can ask questions to our speakers and to our panels. But also there's a discussion forum where we can just have general kōrero about things in the talks or about the kaupapa generally. So that's really cool. Make sure you utilize those functions. And utilizing any of these functions, including just tuning into sessions and posting questions and things like that, actually gets you points, and the points tally up and you can win some really cool prizes. So yeah, you're here, so take part, win some points, win some prizes. One of them, I think, is a pass to the sanctuary I work at, which is a really cool place. You should definitely, try and get points for that reason alone. And yeah, it's now my pleasure to firstly introduce Aisling, who's on the call with us here, who's going to be this morning's session chair. Aisling is a research fellow at Te Whare Wānanga o Otago, the University of Otago, at the Centre of Sustainability. She is a co-lead on Ngā Pika Rere Pau and is supporting the work of the Impact Corps and the Freshwater SIP, which is really cool. She joined BioHeritage initially as part of her PhD, working on Mahikakai outcomes for kekewai, which are kura, freshwater crayfish. So it's great to have her, a really familiar face for the organisation here, doing the chair role this morning. And I'll hand back to her once we have just after this morning's keynote presentation. So this morning's keynote is Dr. Catherine Fabria, who we just learned just before it is just having dinner time over in Canada where she is. So that's for all of us having our morning coffee, but different. So to introduce Dr. Febria, Dr. Febria is, of course, in Canada at the University of Windsor. She is part of the Healthy Headwaters Lab, which focuses on the ecology and restoration of waterways impacted by human impacted landscapes, through a decolonial approach and science-based discovery and solutions. She's an Associate Director of Fishcast, a federal science graduate training program, coordinator, editor of the Journal of Restoration Ecology, an alumni fellow of IPBES, and the co-chair of the International Science Advisory Panel for New Zealand's Biological Heritage and National Science Challenge. She also has a long list of universities that she's attended or been part of, which I'm sure all around the world, which I'm sure she'll draw on with her talk about decolonizing science from an international perspective. So I'll hand over to Dr. Catherine and for her amazing talk.
Kia ora, can you hear me okay? The sound working? Perfect. Tēnā koutou katoa, e te mana whenua, tēnā koutou. Ko Filipino te iwi, ko Tagalog takureo tuatahi, no Canada, Turtle Island o. Ke Windsor, Waiwaiatano, traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy o e noho ana. Nā reira, ko Catherine Fabria toku ingoa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It's such a privilege to be here today, and I really wanted to thank the organizers for inviting me to be part of Crazy Ambitious 3. And it's a privilege to share with you the story around the research that I've been privileged to be participating in and now leading as a lab director faculty member. I'm going to just try and change my slides. So here in Turtle Island, North America, Canada, I'm situated in the heart of the Laurentian Great Lakes. And so I wanted to say, I wanted to mihi to the land that we're on here, traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. And it's been a privilege to go on this journey as a scientist by way of Aotearoa, New Zealand, spending much of my time in Waitaha and Te Waiponamu. But I'm an immigrant settler to these places. I come to you in community within a relationship to heal water and to understand water and learn from water from the colonized islands of the Philippines. So all of those things shape my journey. And what I wanted to talk to you today about is how all of that shapes the way in which we pursue science in the Healthy Headwaters Lab. So pictured here are a number of students and staff who who I hope to do justice by and do well by in talking about the research and the work we do in partnership. I wanted to start with a circle of gratitude. I'm so passionate about freshwater. I'm so passionate about what the smallest of the headwaters and marginalized waterways, these temporary streams and wetlands have taught me about being present and connecting land and water and people. And it's really been a passion for the last 20 years to try and reconnect, use science to reconnect land, water, and people. These ecosystems are the ones that lack legal protections. When they don't go away, they're very easy to bulldoze and bury. And so I've dedicated the majority of my science life trying to understand the connections and quantify and make visible these intermittent streams. I wanted to mihi the Decho, the Mackenzie River, an Arctic river in the northern part of Turtle Island that taught me a lot about variability and how resilient and dynamic aquatic ecosystems must be to support the thriving biodiversity and connections we all value. And that these are the connections that are really threatened because of human impacts and activities. And I wanted to mihi a number of the different universities and Western scientists that have trained me, including Margaret Palmer at the University of Maryland, where I did my postdoctoral research and really did a 90-degree turn in the way in which I wanted to pursue Western science. I was participating in a number of, there are many research restoration syntheses on how uncoordinated things are, how we're spending a lot of our money on restoration, and it's still not leading to the kinds of outcomes that we want as societies around the world. And perhaps it also means something to me that the only photo I have of Margaret is her holding my eldest child at a very critical time in my life as a scientist, transitioning into motherhood as well as an independent researcher. And so I also wanted to extend my gratitude to the global science community. This is where I've really felt a sense of belonging and inclusion with other researchers coming up and really feeling driven to use science to reconnect and to advance sustainability science and restoration work on local and global scales. And so that brings me, that's by way of Aotearoa. And so I wanted to extend my gratitude to the Biological Heritage National Science Challenge that really did give me a sense of belonging in the science community here in Aotearoa. By way of working under the CAREX program in the University of Canterbury, Wananga o Aitaha, as well as partners that were developed there, that and funding that became possible through this research team via bioheritage, as well as living water and other partners and a broad network of farmers and community partners in the region. So I hope, by telling you a little bit about how my approach to decolonizing science, what it looks like here, it really is part of this journey and part of a community that has welcomed my way of thinking and doing really well in Aotearoa. So when I think of things like the Great Lakes, I actually think about the trees and the leaves and the invertebrate communities that all connect to form and provide biodiversity and services and lots of things that we value as humans. And so it really is a passion and a mission of the lab to really focus on the restoration piece and to try and engage the social context to pursue the Western science and the science that we do. So we launched in 2019. I shifted from Aotearoa right before the pandemic here to Turtle Island. And these are the things that really make our team a team. We are extremely values driven. We really seek to decolonialize, take a decolonial approach to the work we do and really intentionally pursue different ways of knowing, center communities, and really try and generate evidence to show how this is really the kind of transformative change we need for restoration. And we need to really rethink what is beneficial societal outcomes and impact and excellence under that umbrella. This is no coincidence that it's in line with the decade of restoration. And so when we look to the best case examples around the world, it really is restoration is possible and planetary sustainability is all the more credible when we incorporate and maximize local and indigenous perspectives in the research and management of our freshwater ecosystems and our ecosystems globally. So some of you might know me from the time when I was in Aotearoa, and just really briefly, as much as we love the braided landscapes of this country, most of my time was really focusing on the agriculturally settled and intensified landscapes. This is Katie and I working on one of 9 different streams where we worked with different communities to develop a toolbox and trial restoration at a number of different locations from land into water. We engaged a number of different methodologies. We focused on a number of issues like macrophytes, We engaged community members to try and implement a plan around functional traits of riparian planting. And we also looked to see whether or not the different native riparian plants could provide benefits for in-stream communities. And while it was a privilege to support the early career researchers, PhD students, and their work here, my role was to really capture the story of partnerships. And it was really clear that together, when we put in different types of investments in terms of resources, land, and people, we generated more co-benefits in accelerating and scaling out restoration from one stream to across a watershed. This is what led me to the community here in the challenge, and I wanted to acknowledge my co-PI, Dr. Helen Warburton. And it's here where a lot of the thought development that shapes what I do at a local level was really implanted, thinking about strategic investment. And if we wanted to really value certain things in science, we needed to fund them and support them and provide the resources. And so I wanted to thank everyone from Andrea to Mel, who really kind of took us under their wing to show us and introduce us to different ways of doing and knowing. And so the ultimate theory that drives all of the work in the space is this idea of resistance and resilience and restoration. And so Izzy Barrett was one of the students who was tested this, but this idea that what we want in a positive resilience setting is all of the different elements of a food web. But what we are working with is a resilient ecosystem, but in an unhealthy way. And when we start thinking about the connections at a number of scales, we can see that ecologically, but also socially. And so I'll just bring you to think about, not only did we do the tests of this theory in ecological systems, I've now really intentionally pivoted towards thinking about the social context as well, and ensuring the interactions that we might want to not only test restoration science, but implement it are in place. So this is where I really wanted to spend time in, is thinking about this emphasis on moving towards ethical and equitable spaces and partnerships in research. And we really are motivated by, we spent a lot of time in the beginning of the lab thinking about the ethosphere, this idea of creating an environment and a process through which research is generated and is in a circular, holistic process. So we have invested first in the trust-based relationships at the individual and community levels to identify the key science questions, to co-create the research, as well as to embed our ways of knowing and knowledge mobilization from the start. And it is a very circular process. The only reason why it is possible is because we have implemented a farm advisory board, as well as an Indigenous knowledge circle. And I wanted to acknowledge the numbers of Indigenous scientists in our team, the Ode'emin, which means heartberry or strawberry, that really ground the thinking and the work that we do in this space. And it really matches our way of thinking in terms of ecological restoration trajectories. We have generational thinking in terms of trying to do restoration and set up the pieces that not only benefit us in this generation, but future generations as well, reflecting on the impacts that previous generations have generated on our freshwater ecosystems and ecosystems in general. So relationships is something that we must prioritize and that we try to do. And so I'm often asked to participate in Indigenous conferences or presentations about the Indigenous components and led components of our research team. And I often really just need to stand aside and really remind people that the knowledge that is revealed there is not for me to extract or use or access, but my role in those spaces are to uphold and respect the self-determination. And that I'm really thinking about the privileges that I might have access to critically and collaboratively engage and change the systems or policies or practices to ensure that we can pursue research that the community are asking me to participate in. So what happens when we do that? The kinds of things that come are a traditional ecological knowledge land-based field course in Bikejwanong with my partner there, Clint Jacobs. We wrote a case study about the thinking around that to really encourage people to pursue their own relationship building and journey from the land with both elders as well as Western scientists in that course. We also have engaged this amazing, incredible rising leaders who have really embraced storytelling through all of our social media platforms and creating art and returning language back to places here in Turtle Island that previously haven't had it. And the side hustle to that is really just getting people to care about drains and their city sewers. And if they can establish a relationship with the places where they are, then that really gets us further in terms of advancing restoration. And so everything about the social media design is coming from that center. And I encourage you to engage in those platforms because we might be testing a couple hypotheses on the back end. And so it also means that we are creating new relationships with our youth to have them sampling kakahi and realizing their interest and passions for ecological monitoring. But it's also informing a lot of the research, really trying to then lead us towards science questions where we're bringing together data sets that never previously have been examined together. So species at risk data for invertebrates with broader benthic macroinvertebrate community questions. It's allowed us to move to new watersheds, also in partnership, to look at the efficacy of restoration around the region. It's also allowed us to start to expand into community science, engaging the data that might be available, not necessarily about the species at risk, but the species that they interact with, to see if that might get us further in understanding what potential distributions of these species might look like. It also brings us to this working with settler farming communities. By working in partnership and creating a space for a farm advisory board of settler and Indigenous farmers, we can tap into my favorite toolbox, which is carbon characterization, to really talk about eutrophication, not by phosphorus or nitrogen, but carbon, the key matter that really connects and binds and facilitates a number of nutrient transformations from land into water. So what might emerge? We are instead of looking at just agricultural-based practices, we have environmental gradients that reflect the real-world practices that farmers are engaging in, from the land into the wetlands and into the drains. We're being able to not only look at agricultural context, but looking at in relationship to urban context to see, are all human impacts the same? And how can we use this to influence and inform locally based restoration? The kinds of insights that come is really a reality check about, with their best case scenario, it looks like our forested soils in the regions where we're at that have been in place for 50 to 70 years, that's the scale at which we start to see carbon accumulation, at the rate at which we're starting to also then see nutrient reductions. This gives us a really good insight into what it might take to accelerate restoration in a local sense. And we continue to follow the same thread that we began in Aotearoa, rethinking riparian communities, thinking about how they might save and support species at risk elsewhere. And it really is a practice and part of our normative practice to rethink and reframe what is impact, how can we fund this? And so that's where I wanted to end today. If I have time, just please let me know if I'm over. My timer stopped. But here's just a couple of examples of the ways in which we've reframed our funding. We literally plug it into our funding lines, much like, but I know BioHeritage does very systematically and strategically. We've invested in alt metrics to make sure that the newsletters, what we produce, the art that comes from this work is widely available. Our biomonitoring tools are widely available to teachers. Again, and keeping track of what that impact might look like. We also engage very heavily in conversations and recognize that even our scientists are undergoing a lot of trauma with the recognition and the discoveries of different residential school graves. And it just, we are trying to follow our best practice and our values to ensure that we have the space to grieve and also pursue research in a way that, the communities are asking us to. And if that means participating in ceremony and not doing science or doing all of those things occur together, then that is just the real world context within which our science is operating. So of course, it brings challenges, but also brings benefits. And much like many examples around the world, we've listed them here as we've gone through this process. But it certainly is, a work in progress. And that is what, our partners tell us is progress. Is the fact that we're trying we're learning a lot by doing. So with that, I just wanted to emphasize all of the lessons that I've learned when I was in Aotearoa, that research excellence is not possible without this sense of belonging and efforts to advance justice and equity and diversity and inclusion. It's built on this broader community of researchers and scholars here in Aotearoa that have invested in really thinking about cultural shifts required to do science. And that translates to so many things even now, like our transformative change of our seminar series, which I invite you to, if there are early career researchers that would love to talk about that, I'd also be interested. And it also means that every grant that we pursue, like this graduate training program, has all of those elements embedded in its design. So with that, I just wanted to thank everyone for teaching me about the water itself, and the communities here to teaching me about how we could think structures. And that means hopefully that we can move forward in a good way. And so I wanted to acknowledge partners like Living Water, who have taken on the institutional structure challenges and have taught me a lot about how we might be able to move pieces and lead to change. And that it looks hard, but it takes time, but it's certainly a privilege to be able to witness the kinds of conversations and actions that have taken place in that space. So again, is it perfect? No, but is it progress? I'd like to think so. And I'm hoping that you have lots of ideas and also realize that my journey really is rooted from the time that I spent here in the Bioheritage Circle. So this is the final photo. We at our traditional ecological knowledge course, we invited students to one of our elders and one of the local knowledge keepers brought sweetgrass or weengush into the lab into the learning center for our last day, and we talked about the stories about it and braiding. And it was very interesting that we all braided things in different ways. You can see someone had lots of little tiny braids within a braid. And I think when we reflect on how we might move forward, it will look different and feel different for everybody, but hopefully we are all moving forward in a good way. So I just wanted to say miigwech, kia ora koutou. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you to the partners who have trusted us to try and champion this vision. And I'd be happy to take questions and participate in as much of today as possible. So thank you very much.
Thank you. A really, really interesting talk. If anyone has any questions at this point, chuck them in that live Q&A down the bottom, and we can discuss them here. But I was thinking during that, comparatively, there are what is noticeable is there are huge similarities between some of those best practice ways to work with Indigenous communities wherever you are in the world. And I think that is really, really cool. Do you think there's, like, comparatively, do you think there is a major difference in terms of the work you've done, or a difference in how those non-Indigenous communities have responded? Because I feel potentially that New Zealand agriculture still has a very colonial mindset and background. And I wonder how you felt that affected your work in New Zealand versus Canada per se.
Yeah, I think what I learned from my experience working in Aotearoa and coming to the Great Lakes was just being really clear that we are engaging local Indigenous knowledges and prioritizing that and trying to be centered and responsive and being very transparent that this is a space where settler and Indigenous stewards, farmers, we need to come together. And so we created these mechanisms, like having an advisory board was something I didn't have previously. So really implementing that and really thinking about who could we engage to be on it. So we hired a farmer to be our first, to be an advisor to us, and saying, like, you know, this is our vision, this is what we're about, and kind of testing. So again, it's a lot of this, like, you know, we did a lot of walk and talks on farms, much like we participate in ceremony and communities. I think this idea and this openness and responsiveness to acknowledging that there is knowledge and generational knowledge, whether or not you are a settler or an Indigenous community, there is knowledge and there are relationships there. So we kind of started without any assumptions, really, just wanting people to understand this is what these are the science tools we have. Is this useful? What are the questions that you might have? And so that year and a half of really listening and participating in community was really just for us to do our research and situate ourselves. But at the same time, there are a lot of similarities. People were like, what do you know about low gradient clay plain streams and eutrophication from New Zealand? I'm like, more than you'd think. So some of the issues are very similar. And even some of the farmers, like, look, you know, I was just like, you have a doppelganger on the other side of the planet. Like, so I think there's, you know, and I think it was really about trying to be authentic to who we were and not pretending that we had the solution. That's really what moved our research well and truly onto the landscape, because farmers told us, yes, there's a lot of those solutions, but it's not been trialed in these local places. And then we have a lot of Indigenous owned land that are renting to settler farmers. And so they had some interest in engaging. So I was very surprised, again, not having any assumptions. Some of the people that decided to be part of our advisory board were settler farmers that had farmed lands on Indigenous land. So they had these connections already. And I think by being clear that we were there to listen and understand, and that these were our values, and I think that's how we self-select. I think it's a little bit more of a harder reach for people that are very much entrenched in their views. But at least it started our conversation and our process, and we've continued to gain credibility in both of those communities because we keep showing up. So it's still a work in progress. It's early days, but it is, I think, communities around the world, there are always people there that are wanting to do better and seeing that we need to do things differently, and kind of trusted us. And that's why we do have mechanisms of like memorandum of understanding with each individual farmer. We have an advisory board. We have these public, transparent sort of social media platform. It is really to try and build that trust and keep that trust in place.
Awesome. Thank you very much. That was, an amazing kōrero, and I'll hand over to Aisling now to introduce our next speaker.
Oh, kia ora, Taylor. Kia ora tātou. Thank you so much, Kat. It's always a privilege to hear from you. I'm delighted to now introduce the research project part of the session, so focused around pathways to ecosystem regeneration. This project, or this team, aims to build social and ecological resilience by understanding and restoring connections between people and nature. They're working with communities to develop tools and approaches that reflect their unique needs and contexts, and ultimately support their efforts to scale up for impact. So first up, we're hearing from Sarah Yarrow on farming with native biodiversity, a cross-sector pilot. Sarah is the National Manager of the Fonterra Living Water Partnership. She's worked for over 20 years in local and central government, and with a wide-ranging background that includes strategy, policy, community-facing programs, integrated catchment management, and general program management. So I'm delighted to now introduce Sarah to the stage.
Hi, well, kia ora tātou, everyone. Ko Sarah Yarrow aho. And ka rāwiri, Dr. Kat, such inspiring work you do and so relevant to us here in Aotearoa. You are one cool science chick, and I'm looking forward to working with you more soon. As Aisling said, I'm Sarah, and I'm the National Manager of a partnership between the Department of Conservation and Fonterra called Living Water. DOC and Fonterra have been working together for 9 years now, solutions for freshwater and farming to thrive together. We've learned a lot during that time about what works and what doesn't, and like many others working in the nature space, are realising that significant system change, how we organise ourselves, and how institutions are set up to support this work is key. Now I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about the Farming with Native Biodiversity pilot we're involved in with others, but just while I'm talking, I'm keen to get some impressions from you fellow conferencees, and I understand this might help you win some points. So if you've been on a farm recently or ever, please comment in the discussion forum anything that you noticed about the nature, or maybe the lack of nature, or any impressions. It can be what you saw, how it felt, the smells, particular species, or anything that surprised you. So Strategic Objective 6 of the Bioheritage Science Challenge has a focus on understanding these social and ecological linkages. So I'll start with who is involved with this particular mahi, this pilot that we're involved in. We know no one organisation or sector has all the skills and knowledge to regenerate Aotearoa, so we must work together. And this pilot brings together a trusted community organisation in the New Zealand Landcare Trust, 2 primary sector organisations in Fonterra and Silverfern Farms, central government, local government, science and research organisations, and iwi Māori. This pilot grew out of a previous Bioheritage Science Challenge project, Farming and Nature Conservation, that was led by Professors Hannah Buckley at AUT and David Norton at UC. That project identified that there are a very limited amount of ecologists in New Zealand who work alongside farmers to identify what's on their farm and how to manage it, and also no one source of truth that farmers can access for help. There's also an issue around time and money and knowledge to be able to do this work for farmers. Pastoral farms cover 50% of New Zealand. Therefore, how this land is farmed is vital for healthy native biodiversity. With climate change and the alarming stats on biodiversity loss, as well as protecting what is there, we also need to put nature back into these farming landscapes. We've learned through Living Water that nature does have the answers, billions of years of evolution can't be wrong, and that nature-based solutions have the best chance of increasing on-farm resilience in the face of what is coming. From a primary sector perspective, we also need to be showing more and more to international markets that we are not just making things less bad, but we're actively working to make things better. As market and climate forces increase, buyers, banks, and insurers are looking to support farms who are more environmentally resilient. So building on that, we have knowledge of what's needed from the previous work that's been done in the Science Challenge. We do work on farm right now through our industry farm advisor services and have significant national reach as Fonterra and Silver Fern farms. And so this project presents an opportunity to mould those two things together and look for ways to change things at a system and organisation scale. We know this project won't fix it all, but like what Kat said, we're making progress. It's starting to look at the social processes and support needed to achieve change. So to the what and how to make it happen. This pilot project aims to foster ecosystem-based mindsets and build biodiversity knowledge and capability to support on-farm change. So what we want to do is engage and empower farmers to transform farming into an enterprise that is both profitable and nature positive. We know the mindset shift is key to achieving this change, and we think it's key to achieving it at scale. And here I'd like to introduce one of our farmers that we work with, Graeme Gillett. He has QE2 covenanted 2 remnant Cody forest blocks on his farm in Wairua in Northland, and as well as that, he has planted thousands of natives over the last few years that we've been working with him. And to the how. So what will this pilot do? We're going to train ecologists to work with farm teams, so farmers, farm advisors and catchment groups. We're going to develop training and resources to scale up that access and reach. We're going to integrate biodiversity into industry farm planning systems and investigate what a sustainable long-term service delivery model might look like. The investment for this pilot is $1.5 million over 2 years, and we're almost through year 1 already, so we're June 2023, so we've got about a year to go. What Fonterra particularly likes about this pilot and wanted to get involved, and the key drivers for getting involved, the advice through the pilot is not tethered to regulation, it's not delivered by councils or government, so it's via an independent trusted advisor, and we know this approach will have more success with farmers. We've learnt through Living Water that genuine co-design is the only way to achieve enduring outcomes. It will provide solutions that can be integrated directly with existing farm planning systems, so our 10,000 farmers will have direct access to this information. And it's looking to understand what an ongoing service delivery and funding model for New Zealand might look like. We need to create an industry, employment and training. This is as important for our future as a well-functioning health or education system. And I'd just really like to acknowledge our project team and ecologists who are involved, Josh, Becky, Tyler, Caleb, David, Esther and Angela, and our project steering group of Bridget, Francis, Matt, Danielle, Joanne, Hannah, David, Mark and Doug, who all bring great experience, skills, insights, and most importantly, araha to this project. Thank you.
Kia ora, Sarah. Awesome talk and great use of the discussion forum. It was really cool. We're now moving on to a pre-recorded talk from Corinne Bataille. She runs Boundaryless NZ, a research consultancy specializing in social science within socio-ecological systems. She's passionate about investigating the role of different types of values and worldviews in environmental governance and management of food systems, including for her PhD, which she completed in 2020. All right, on to Corinne.
Nā mihi mahana ki a tātou, kona ti wiwi te iwi no Normandy aho ke o tōtahi aho e noho ana, ko Corinne Bataille tōku ingoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Hi everyone, my name is Corinne Bataille from Ōtautahi Christchurch. My current work focus with SO6 is disseminating my PhD research findings through publications and engaging with iwi and stakeholders. The goal of the research was to investigate how we might facilitate kaitiakitanga by Māori to help reverse the decline of biodiversity in wetland ecosystems. I'd like to acknowledge the Ngāi Tahu Advisory Committee, with whom I've been partnering since 2016. NTAC are a group of 12 tangata tiaki from different ruranga, and they've been directing and guiding me in my PhD research, and it's an ongoing partnership. I was born and raised in northwest France in the region of Normandy. Working with NTAC has enabled me to recognize the importance of my French whakapapa and to start valuing Normandy's vast and precious wetlands. This partnership has truly been life-changing for me. I've been engaging with tangata whenua in the Ngāi Tahu Takiwa and with stakeholders from across Aotearoa. A central focus of my work is to raise stakeholder awareness around Māori values and the constraints that tangata whenua experience in expressing those values. in wetland ecosystems. Ideally, stakeholders will then engage with tangata whenua if they don't already do so, and recognize, understand, and integrate Māori values in their wetland management. Going boundaryless is about seeing beyond and navigating across boundaries, which can be physical, cultural, or structural. My vision is for stakeholders to see Mahingakai as mainstream, meaning cross-cultural engagement between stakeholders and tangata whenua is fluid and constructive. People work to protect, enhance, or restore Aotearoa's precious wetlands while embracing a Māori worldview. Most importantly, the Crown honours Māori self-determination, which means tangata tiaki can make their own decisions on environmental issues of importance to them. The result being biocultural wetland health that enables the expression of Māori culture while being compatible with farm systems. When taking part in webinars or field trips or visiting landowners, I'm on the lookout for what people have been doing to protect, enhance, or restore wetland ecosystems. Importantly, I'm trying to understand people's attitudes and towards Māori values and interests. The picture you can see is of a restored wetland in Canterbury, taken during a field trip organized by Environment Canterbury. I'll now present 3 of the people I met over the past few months. This is Noel Fine, who owns a lifestyle property in Canterbury with his wife Sue. They've been living there for 20 years. Noel has undertaken a lot of native planting and riparian planting at his property. He also helped to plant natives in the Ohoka domain, which boasts a constructed wetland. The work was funded by the Waimakariri District Council. During our conversation, Noel was interested in finding out more about what other landowners are doing to embrace Māori values in their farm systems. This is an irrigated farm within the Central Plains Water Irrigation Scheme. I spent a morning with Frank looking at the operation and processes. It was my first time close to a pivot irrigator, which was impressive to see. Frank spoke about the limitations, but also the opportunities that come with these irrigators. For example, you can't have tall trees in the irrigator's path, but you can have smaller native hedging, which can be easily incorporated into this kind of farm system. This is the Beiski family, regenerative sheep and beef farmers. I met Hamish at an MPI workshop on regenerative agriculture last year. He was very keen to find out about Māori values within Māori farm systems. He showed me his wetland, you can see it on the top right picture, which he would like to restore with some planting of natives. He was open to have people come around and look at his farm, so it was great to be able to connect him with Hokonui Runanga about wetland planting and river monitoring. Hamish is at the very start of engagement with iwi on this project, so it will be great to see how things pan out over the next few months. Going boundaryless is taking the perspective that we can do more together than alone. When landowners and tangata whenua actively engage with each other around biodiversity work, and both parties are willing to learn from each other about from their different perspectives, the well-being of the environment and people can be restored. Kia ora.
Such a thoughtful talk as always from Corinne. Now we get to hear from Robin Holmes. Robin is a freshwater ecologist whose research interests include quantifying aspects of physical habitat that supports stream health and understanding fish community responses to river and stream restoration. He's also involved in community approaches to river health improvement and fishery management in agricultural catchments. And so he's going to talk to us today about, is there a role for trout in regenerating New Zealand's biological heritage? Take it away, Robin.
Yeah, kia ora koutou. Thanks for the introduction. So first, just want to point out that there's no way to title this talk without raising a few eyebrows. So just bear with me. Just want to acknowledge my co-authors who did a lot of the work. Mark Tadaki and Kylie McFarlane, they're social scientists here at work at Cawthron Institute, and Dr. Jane Kitson, who's a iwi researcher down in Marahikau, Southland. So this work was a small target, a really highly targeted interview-based study, and from the outset, our sort of goal was to better understand the range of perspectives on trout management and trout. And the way this fit into the National Biological Heritage Challenge was it's sort of, we were connecting with the way people connected with nature. We were looking at how people value and connect nature, and particularly barriers and pathways. So trout and trout management, as you'll see, can be both a barrier and a pathway to regenerating Indigenous biodiversity. So the approach was we sort of took a targeted approach at doing a few interviews in depth rather than lots of interviews. And we had sort of three broad groups, but acknowledging these groups are sort of overlapping and sort of fake groups to some degree. And then within those groups, we sort of had a balance using researcher networks of people that we thought would be sort of have different positions on trout. And so we're not trying to canvass the perspectives on trout out there. We're just trying to put a few pins on the map about how people within different groups within society view trout. So we had scientists, Māori knowledge holders, and fish management agencies. And the key ones we chose there were Dock and Fish and Games for their obvious role in managing trout and native fish. So our interviews explored just personal connections with fish in general. So not specifically just trout, but any fish. We asked people about healthy ecosystems in general as well, and trout's place within them. And then we went into questions trying to look at impacts, both positive and negative, and then experiences with trout management, knowledge gaps, and looking forward. So there's two outputs that I'll just put up there first. The first is a report, and it's 150 pages of fairly long form tracks of perspectives from people that came out through these semi-structured interviews. There's really rich stories in there, and I encourage you, if you're interested, to go to that. And then we had a short form publication where we've put some researcher interpretation on those. So the first one is sort of a for the record, and the next one is using a relational values approach, looking at into what we found. And just jumping straight into the punchline in some ways is that there's a fair amount of debate around trout and different perspectives on them, but among both critics and advocates, we found just an immense amount of passion and care and the importance that freshwater fish, any fish, that could be any fish from kana through to trout, enabled people's lives of value. So it's just something that we need to recognize. And the way that people connect to nature through fish and fishing was just so important to these people. And the sort of the emotions that expressed by people, excitement, joy, and intrigue, were really sort of seemed common across people. The loss and pain one was kind of interesting. So I've just got two quotes here to share with you. This first one is from a salmon scientist, and I'll just read it out. So in my teens, and even earlier with my father, you'd go down to the mouth of the Rakai River. There could be hundreds of anglers down there sometimes. The tide would start to rise and people would say, fish on, fish on. The excitement was just palpable. Now when I go down there may be no more than a dozen people fishing. People are sitting on the bank, some quite forlornly, wondering where the salmon have gone. When I see that, I can really relate to Māori, some iwi who have lost their tuna stocks. They tell a similar story of dissociation and loss. And as if that person knew what other interviewees were going to come up with. So this is a story about kana, which are lamprey, from one of the iwi member. They, kana, knot themselves up in a ball. You could get 200 or 300 in one ball in the old days. Today, if you're lucky, you see one in the river now. It's quite sad. I've stopped going out for them just for the sake of maybe letting them breed. We've been doing this for years, hundreds of years, and it's never made a difference to them, but something has changed. Something in our waterways, I don't know what it is. So there's just that commonality of loss and passion and concern that I think is something that we can build on, which I'll talk about a bit later. So at risk of talking a little bit out of turn here, these slides were put together by Jane. There's just a couple. An interesting thing is that just the diversity of views on trout and trout management that came from just the few iwi interviewees that we had. There was some fairly sort of harrowing stories of displacement of customary fisheries by trout and sort of disconnection of cultural practices around customary fisheries, and some fairly sort of despicable stuff that happened in the not too distant past. And then the distribution of iwi involvement in fisheries is very, unequally spread across the country. But in the same breath, there was some people that sort of took quite a pragmatic view to these fish and now sort of value them in some quite profound ways. So some of them seeing trout even as a sign of a healthy ecosystem, valuing them as a sort of a de facto mahinga kai, but also, these sort of harrowing stories of what was lost by the introduction of these fish. So there's a lot there, and I can't go into it in 10 minutes. So we'll just leave it there and point you towards the outputs that we've done. So basically, back to the original question, there are positive effects of trout in terms of connection with whānau and place, but trout and trout management have interfered with culture and connection with place. So they do both. It depends on the situation you are in. They've had positive effects on bioheritage through protection of vast tracts of river, through the passion and advocacy that creates sort of things like water conservation parks, but they've got negative effects on trout, on various non-migratory galaxids in particular. Everybody noted that. Didn't matter where they were, which side of the fence they were on. Lots of disagreement on how trout might impact migratory species like whitebait, but basically coming from an information vacuum. And when prompted for positive effects, people sort of struggled with this because, they're a deviation from the natural system, and that even if you've got native predators eating them, is that a good thing? It sort of, we ended up getting some interesting answers. So in summary, the project sort of gave it, have I run out of time yet? No. The project gave a voice to a wide range of viewpoints, from trout haters to trout lovers. And a real key message is that there was diverse views across and within groups, but then common themes emerged. And something that sits underneath this is how people viewed a healthy system really sort of showed how they viewed trout. So, whether ecosystems are defined by pre-human conditions, trout have no place there. Whether they're defined by how useful they are, they might have a place there. Or whether they're defined as humans being part of them, well, then it really depends on how they impact on what people value. These were sort of fairly shared common principles that came out across the board. They sort of, everybody just across the board agreed that decisions about freshwater fish and fisheries should be made in partnership, in treaty partnership with tangata whenua. Everybody also agreed that fish management agencies should work together across the board to set national objectives. So at the moment, we've got all sorts of different agencies with different
I think we just lost him.
Yeah, or hopefully he might be able to join us soon. Or in the meantime, I'm delighted to welcome all of our speakers back for a panel discussion, as well as Joanne Clapcott and Danielle Shanahan. These are our co-leads of SO6. So Joanne of Ngāti Poro is a senior scientist and team leader within the Coastal and Freshwater Group at Cawthron Institute, and Danielle is chief executive at Zealandia, whose recent research focuses broadly on the health and well-being benefits of nature. So really excited to be able to talk with everyone here. I'm not sure we've got any questions in the chat quite yet. So, oh no, we do. Fantastic. I will start there. So we have a question from Rebecca McDougall, and Rebecca has asked, do farmers find it easy to access information on planting native trees with long-term establishment in mind? Do you think this needs improving?
Oh, such a key question. It's a good question. Look, there's definitely information out there. Lots of councils have put together planting guides, specific to their region. But the reality is, you got to know that it exists. You got to know how to find it. So, like I said in my talk, no one source of truth really for farmers to access that information. 2 projects that I know that have happened recently through Te Ururako, 1 Billion Trees. They did a great piece of social research with farmers about how trees on farm and how to help farmers, find information and do a better job. So that information is out there now in terms of a process to go through and the right tree in the right place. So not just natives, but also for other uses. And the Sustainable Business Network has just launched their Regenerating Nature information, and that has got some great information that can take farmers, rural landowners down a pathway of basically starting from scratch. So those are 2 things that are already out there, and obviously that's a major thing that we want this project to address, that we're involved in the Farming with Native Biodiversity pilot. So it's coming. We can do better.
Awesome. Oh, cheers, Sarah. I see we've also got a comment here from Nick Waipara, just saying awesome talk, Sarah, and great to see that it's building on Hannah Buckley's project in Tranche 1, which, yep, absolutely right. There's also been some great discussion in the forum, which I really encourage people to check out. While we've got like the whole team here, I'd really love to hear where is SO6 headed in the future? What are your priorities for the next couple of years?
Shall I start with that one, Joanne? Great. So we've got some exciting mahi that we weren't able to fit into our presentations today that's underway, and much of that is focused around exemplars. So this is where we're looking at communities that are coming together to protect or enhance te taio. Currently, we have a couple underway already. One is predator-free Wellington, so some focus on the social and ecological outcomes that are emerging from that, and another one down south on the Upuahi Heathcote River network as well. So we're also looking at making some connections with some northern communities around this. So I think that's really a big focus for us now, is looking to harness learnings that are coming out from those collectives, but also support them with the research that they need and share that, and facilitate some forums where these collectives can come together to learn from each other as well. Any thoughts to add, Joanne?
No, that pretty much covers it, but I think it's been quite evident from our session today that there's very much a focus on social ecological systems and the connectivity between people and the environment. And that continues through all our work streams and the talks we've heard today. And linking also back to Catherine's great opening presentation, the importance of decolonising the space often requires us to pause and reflect on the loss and the hurt and acknowledge that, and not just sweep it under the table, and to think about the best ways moving forward that resets our current paradigm, not just builds slowly, but allows us to actually step back and think, how can we do this different? Because we're in a small island nation in the South Pacific, and we can do things differently, learn from ourselves and our future to move into, and our past to move into the future. So that's just, I also wanted to acknowledge Robin. Sorry, we lost your main point right at the end there. If you wanted to jump in and share that, that would be great.
Oh, yeah. So just that, I was just wrapping up with the slides actually, and we'd got through the three main principles, and the final one that I didn't get through was that trout management should include responsibilities to limit the negative impacts of trout, as well as manage them for the fishery values that they provide at the least. And I just wanted to sort of ask people to sort of ground their discussions about trout and in compassion for both, for the people that value these fish, for a couple of reasons. One, maybe just pragmatically, if you don't want to lose a potential environmental advocate that could help regenerate, then thinking about these things as pests just shuts people down. And so there's that. And then when I'm just talking to these advocates, I'm hoping this piece of work can open their minds up a bit to the sort of fairly myopic focus that they tend to have on just single species management and all the wider things that have happened in the past and everything. So I'm just hoping that this piece of work can help people think about this issue with a bit more compassion. That's about it.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you for those wonderful thoughts. It feels really interesting to see so many synergies as well between the work happening around trout and in farming systems, particularly around identifying shared values and I suppose finding ways forward together. We've got another question from Nick Waipara. So further to Rebecca's question, some farmers are financially constrained by funding, fencing and plants. Does Fonterra and councils still co-fund?
I think that's probably one for me.
That'll be Sarah.
Yeah. Look, definitely through our Sustainable Catchments program with Fonterra, we put our energy into sort of the priority areas where we can do funding. We've also hooked up with things like the Kaipara Moana remediation, so that big swag of money that's gone into Northland there to protect the Kaipara and the issues around the sediments. So we're one of the delivery partners for that. So we do a cost sharing with farmers around that. But I think what we're truly trying to do with this pilot is look at what is the service delivery model and a sustainable funding model, so that we can do this across New Zealand and do it quicker. So yeah.
Awesome. Cheers, Sarah. Also, Taylor and Edward, is there any questions that you would like to ask the panel while we're all here? Not to put you on the spot. We can.
No, I don't have any questions for the panel. Sorry.
Sweet, easy as. Corinne, it's lovely to have you join us the session in the panel session here as well. Was there anything that you would like to build on from your presentation around perhaps next directions for the work you've been doing in your consultancy company?
Yes, I've been spending a day with regenerative farmers. Can you hear me? Yeah, great. And I can see that the way that people see nature or their farm systems is the way reflects how they see themselves. So if somebody takes responsibility for their own health and what happens to them in their life, it will be reflected in how they farm. That was my main point that I've gathered in the last day or so. So self-compassion and will lead to compassion for others and for the environment and the work that we do. Yeah.
Oh, awesome! Thank you for that. I was wondering, Joanne and Danielle, are you both leading your own projects within this SO6 as well, or projects aligned to it?
I'll jump in first and then Danielle can follow. There is a lot of aligned mahi, as we know that the number of people working in restoration in New Zealand is huge, whether it be through predator control or thinking about different regenerative systems. I mean, it's just huge. So by nature, our work does align closely. Yeah, so there's both restoration projects, there's some research that I'm working with Robin and others at Cawthron and partners across the country, for example, called Fish Futures, that can be found on fishfutures.co.nz. And that's thinking about reimagining our freshwater management through a fish lens, and yeah, building capacity and capability and multidisciplinary studies to think about how we can do that, for example. But there's a lot of aligned mahi, isn't there, Danielle?
There certainly is. Same with the Zealandia whānau here. For example, our sanctuary to see kia mauri ora te kaiwharawhara, and Joe Ledington presented earlier this week on that mahi. So we really like here to have our action paired with research. So that's a key focus that's going on with us. So I oversee that kind of research and those social, real, as Joanne, as per everyone else here, that key focus on social and ecological linkages and those outcomes that come from connecting with te tao and actually regenerating it. So plenty of aligned work happening.
It all sounds such important work. Thank you very much. I see we're just running over time now. We've got one last question from Niall. She's asked, have you found a significant difference between farming communities in their engagement, i.e. are communities divided, and how does this affect the ability to move forward with a socio-ecological approach? Anyone keen to provide a quick 2-minute answer? If you can.
I can talk from our experience in Living Water just around working at catchment level and then at a landscape level. People come with different, world views and backstories and history, and we do need to work together. And it's certainly been quite challenging in some of the partnerships we've been involved in, working with communities to get a common understanding about, how we're going to do things. We might have a common understanding about what we want to achieve, but then how you do it, there can be some quite interesting conversations. So one of the things we've certainly put a primary focus on is around the social aspects of those projects and the relationships, and ensuring that we have good guidance in those projects around basically being coached and how to have the right conversations in the right way and get people moving forward. So
Cheers. Awesome answer. Thank you very much. Yeah, cool. I think that brings us to the end of the session.
Yeah. Thank you very much to all of our speakers and to all of our panel members. There isn't really a round of applause type scenario here because they won't hear you. But again, mihi to all of you, and thank you for joining us for speaking today. I think if I had to take away one thing from that session, it was that we often assume that, farmers or people who are interested in trout fishing or those sorts of things don't have the same connection to wildlife or to biodiversity because of those the misconceptions or preconceptions about those activities. But I think if we treat them as having a connection to the land, having a connection to biodiversity, and having a sort of cultural knowledge that we can appreciate as scientists, and that we kind of give that a similar sort of weight to the way that we're now bringing a lot of cultural knowledge into our work, I think we'd be a lot better off going forward. So just we've ended the session a little bit late, so we're back in 7 minutes time at 11:15. Please go get a cup of coffee and do whatever you need to, have a stretch, and we'll see you back there in 7 or so minutes. Thank you very much.